Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Ballcap Sports with Erik from Humm Baby Baseball. We are bringing you inning 5 of the Ken Burns Rewatch recap. Hope you've enjoyed the first 4 innings. You could have caught inning 4 back on Erik's channel, Humm Baby Baseball. Erik, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, pretty good. What's going on?
Good to hear. Well, we are going to dive into inning 5. A lot in this inning. I mean, these are 2-hour long. These are 2-hour long episodes, so there's a lot in all of them. I kind of feel though it's a little bit less than what we had in the 19 teens with everything that was happening with the Black Sox and everything, but still a lot in this one. Let's dive right into it. Inning 5, Shadow Ball covers the 30s. A tumultuous decade as the Great Depression had gripped the globe. 1 out of 4 Americans were out of work, and Major League Baseball wasn't immune. Fans couldn't afford to get into games. Attendance fell off. The St. Louis Browns averaged fewer than 1,500 fans a game. The Reds, the Braves, the Phillies nearly shut down altogether. It was a tough decade, but baseball was still able to provide many historic moments and heroes for the fans. Black baseball flourished during the Great Depression, while most white teams struggled to get by. In the 30s, Negro Leagues was equal to that of Major League Baseball, which had always been Rube Foster's dream. You had the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays leading the way. The Crawfords were probably the best team in Pittsburgh. We have our formal introduction to Satchel Paige and several firsthand stories from his old teammates who were interviewed during the episode. Satchel was the best pitcher of the time and a showman to boot. He knew he was great. We also meet Josh Gibson, who many called the Black Babe Ruth, though some believe it should have been the other way around. He's credited with 70 home runs in 1931 and a lifetime total north of 900. That number might be hard to put into context until you understand just how many games they were playing. Teams in the Negro Leagues were constantly on the road, playing 2, maybe 3 games a day, traveling from one city to the next. There were players like Buck Leonard, Martin DeHalgo, and James Cool Papa Bell that were all stars at the time. During the Depression, the Kansas City Monarchs were the most profitable team in baseball. The stalwart of that team was Buck O'Neil, who's interviewed a lot in this documentary. He played first base for 20 years for that team, became their manager, and led them to 5 pennants. MLB saw the rise and domination of Lou Gehrig during the 30s, surpassing Babe Ruth as the best slugger in the Yankee lineup and not missing a game since 1925. More on him in a moment. The Cardinals were great during the decade, too, led by the Gas House Gang. Giants were elite, led by Carl Hubbell, who famous broadcaster Red Barber said would be his pitcher if he needed someone on the mound to save his life. We see the end of Babe Ruth in the 30s, too. After he calls a shot in the 32 World Series versus the Cubs, his skills begin to decline, but his aspirations to manage were growing. But unfortunately, the Yankees weren't going to give him a chance. The Boston Braves, however, told them they would, though they really had no intention. They just wanted him to boost the gate. During Ruth's final Sunday game, he smacks 3 home runs at Forbes Field, 1 that left the park altogether, something no one had done before. By the end, he and Gehrig had stopped talking, and Ruth was resentful of players that had passed him on the field. The 1936 season saw 2 players make their debut, Bob Feller of the Indians and Joe DiMaggio with the Yanks. Feller was just 17 years old, struck out 15 in his first start, and then went back to finish high school. DiMaggio had a 61-game hitting streak in the minors, and in his first year in New York, he hit 29 home runs with 125 RBI. In 1939, the other Yankee star, Lou Gehrig, felt something was wrong. He was struggling at bat, didn't have the energy he used to, and for the first time in 14 years, on May 1st, 1939, he took himself out of the lineup. 2,130 games. He didn't want to let his team down. He was examined at the Mayo Clinic for a week in June and was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which involves the motor pathways and cells of the central nervous system. His career was over. The news stunned the country. And on 4th of July that year, Lou Gehrig retired. Ruth came back and buried the feud between he and Gehrig. Gehrig gave a speech that we've all heard, that he considers himself the luckiest man in the world. And though he'd been given a bad break, he had an awful lot to live for. Gehrig died just 2 years later. Other big events of the decade. First All-Star game, which was actually a gimmick to draw in fans. the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame opens. Hank Greenberg was leading a formidable Tigers team and was hitting home runs versus Hitler, in his words. Greenberg was even close to tying Ruth's home run mark for a single season. In 1935, the Reds and Phillies played the first night game at Crosley Field, another gimmick to boost the gate. So a lot happening in this season. I want to kick it to you, Erik. Get your initial thoughts. You watch this, you see this. There's a lot that happens here. Yeah, Gehrig, you got a lot with the Negro Leagues here. What sort of is your big takeaway from this inning?
Well, my takeaway is that, this is, Babe Ruth's getting older, not as good anymore, not ready to retire. And who's the next Babe Ruth? It might have been, if they were allowed to play, it probably would have been someone from the Negro Leagues, Josh Gibson, one of those guys, Cool Papa Bell. They had so many unbelievable players, and we don't have very much footage. We don't have very much stats. Just what a waste. So this was probably the most depressing episode. I mean, we've had a little bit in the past episodes as far as the gentleman's agreement and all that, but this is where you really see the talent, that, common sense will tell you that, every human being has the ability to play baseball. There's going to be talent across all races, and to exclude an entire race is just a shame. And that's the biggest thing I took away.
You're right. Me too. That you really watch this and it makes you sort of, wish that they had just done it differently.
Sure.
That whole situation, you really long for an integrated league at the time when you watch this and you hear the stories about Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell and Buck Leonard and a lot of these other names, and wish you could have seen them going up against Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
And Dazzy Vance, a lot of these guys that we all missed out on. And, they had their own league, a very profitable league with some teams, a successful league, a very a league that was on par. But what they didn't have is you didn't have the best going up against the best. Both sides didn't have the best going up against the best, and that's what we would love to see. And you also didn't have. I don't think you had such good stat keeping. So that's what a lot of baseball is, right? Is you can compare Mike Trout to Stan Musial or Babe Ruth to Albert Pujols with the stats. That's the underlying factor. Is those stats are pretty much the same, and unfortunately, we don't have that because they weren't allowed to play together, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's just insane, and I don't even know what to say about that. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: do you think you mentioned Ruth getting a little bit older? Do you think he should have been given a shot as a manager? Did he sort of ruin his chance with his off the field behavior? He still had a 20-year career or so. Do you think he should have been given a shot to manage?
I think he did ruin his chance, but he should have still got a shot. When you behave that way, I guess that's the price you pay. But still, when you have that kind of, that base kind of ability and that kind of natural baseball talent, and you've been around the game that long, and your name is Babe Ruth, I can't believe not one team. I can understand maybe the Yankees didn't want to give him a chance, but not one team wanted to. That's just amazing. Even the Boston Braves, they let him play, but they had no intention, like you said, of letting him be manager. If he wasn't any good, you could just fire him. I just can't believe nobody would give him a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is, you bring him in, you let him manage for a year or two. You have him go to Boston was a bottom feeder team. They weren't any good. So what do you have to lose? Even if he's not out there hitting home runs, boosting the gate. If he was the manager, he would have boosted the gate too.
Oh, yeah.
People would have wanted to come around and talk to Babe and get his autograph because you still had incredible access to these guys. I think it was either this season or this inning or the previous inning where it talked about how his kid went up to the hotel when the Yankees were in town and asked what room Babe Ruth was in. You can still get to face-to-face with players at the time. And so, he still could have boosted the gate as a manager wherever he went. So, Boston kind of did him over. And the movie that they put out there, Babe, with John Goodman, whatever your feelings are on that, they sort of, in that movie, I feel like they did a good job of telling that story the fact that he wanted to go manage, they wouldn't let him manage, and he ends up walking away because they weren't going to give him that chance.
I got the poster right behind me here.
There it is. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So that's that's something big. Another just to kind of piggyback on the Yankees, because they were a big team this decade. They had a lot of the talent because they were going out and spending the money on it. But Gehrig, I mean, this whole thing at the end of the decade, with him coming down with that illness. Like, I went back and I was looking at it. I really think, and you let me know what you think, I think he misses out on mortality with this thing. So he could be the all-time RBI leader today. He's 7th with 1,995. Hank Aaron has 2,297. So that's 2 seasons. That's 3 seasons that Gehrig could have gotten to that number. And he was only 36. He missed out on his age 36 season. So the skills are going to start to decline, but he probably has a good age 36, a good age 37. And at age 38, it probably starts to decline and maybe hangs on for a year or two. So you probably have at least 4 seasons of Gehrig. He could have been the all-time RBI leader. He finished with 493 home runs. So certainly he'd be in the mid-500s, possibly 600, which would make him one of 10 to do it. At the time, it would have made him the second to do it. He had 2,721 hits, so 3,000 was a layup. He had a 340 batting average. And as for runs, he had 1,888 and was scoring an average between 120 to 160 a season, which is just insane. So he would have finished over 2,000 and probably had the record for most runs. What I'm saying here is he could have been the greatest player of all time with all of those numbers, because Cobb is considered one of the best. He didn't have the power numbers. Gehrig was basically doing what Cobb was doing with the power numbers. I mean, and a few less hits, right? Like, Cobb had, 1,000 more hits than Gehrig, but still Gehrig probably finishes with 32 or 3,300. Gehrig missed out on immortality with this illness that hits him. And really all he's known for is the consecutive game streak, which almost is kind of, it was a great accomplishment, but it takes away from statistically what he was doing. He's one of the best ever. And I know we look back at him as an all-time, as one of the greats, but you could have made an argument that he was the greatest if this doesn't happen.
I think so, yeah. You hear Lou Gehrig, I think a lot of people also think, the game streak and Babe Ruth's teammate. You think of kind of Babe Ruth. You don't think of Lou Gehrig himself and how great he was. I mean, big baseball fans probably know, but he would have been definitely well over 500 home runs. And but you could also look at the other way. At least he did play basically a full career. I mean, he had a Hall of Fame career, and I guess could have still got that great record. Probably might have still stood today. Another thing, because who knows if Cal Ripken Jr. would have been able to break that if he hadn't.
Oh man, good point. Cal, I don't know if Cal breaks that, because Gehrig would have kept going. And I think Gehrig probably has 3 or 4 more years without missing a game. So good, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Let's get into let's get into socially speaking. One of our categories. There's some really good ones here to pick and choose from, and I'll let you pick. But I've got as sort of my the nominee pool, Satchel Paige, because he was a showman. He knew he was great, and he would tell everybody about it. So Satchel would have been great. Babe at the time, I think, would have been really interesting to just. I think he probably would have been kicking up a lot of feuds with people because he was so resentful of better players passing him. Dazzy Vance, pitcher for the Cardinals, who said he'd bring more people into the stadium than Babe Ruth, and that's before he even pitched in a game. Leo the Lip DeRocher. So I think out of those 4, for socially speaking, if you could go back in time, if they had social media, Twitter, Instagram, all this stuff, who would you want to follow out of those guys to just sort of keep up with them?
I guess you said Satchel Paige. Is that because there's just the stories you hear about him and the way even though I haven't heard him in too many actual videos, but when you hear the stories about the things he would say and just how good he was, it would be interesting to follow him, before and after he eventually did make it to the big leagues, but he was older at that time. All his prime years were in the Negro Leagues. So it would have been fun to watch him. He probably would have talked so much crap saying, I'll strike out Ruth, I'll strike out Gehrig, I'll strike out all these guys.
Yeah.
Which he probably would have, so.
There would have been a great Twitter feud between some of those players of the Negro Leagues and players in white baseball, because you think about it, there were some guys that would have been open to whites and blacks playing together at the time, and then there were some guys who were not, and it would have been interesting to see the feuding between them and player. Satchel Paige saying, "I'm going to strike you out," and then the other guy saying, "No, you won't." And then they did play. They would meet up, barnstorming, exhibitions, things like that. It was either this inning or the previous inning, where they said after the World Series, you would have all-stars from Major League Baseball and Negro League Baseball meet up and play. And most of the time, the teams from the Negro Leagues won those games. So there was definitely a lot of good talent in the Negro Leagues that just missed out, but Satchel Paige would have been good. I also think Dazzy Vance would have been popping off all the time on social media. It would have been probably comical. I can't think of anybody that it would compare to right now, but he might have been like a Trevor Bauer is right now, just maybe amplified a little bit. Trevor Bauer isn't that boastful. I think Dazzy Vance would have been boastful on top of everything else. So those two probably would have been pretty good. Let's get into historic teams. Out of this decade, the Yankees were probably the historic team, 5 for 5 on championships. The Cubs won 3 pennants in the decade, but no World Series wins. Cardinals went to 3 and won 2 with that Gas House gang. New York Giants went to 3 World Series and won 1. And then in the Negro Leagues, Kansas City Monarchs won 2 Western pennants. The Pittsburgh Crawfords won 2 East-West championships and an East Region pennant. So you had some really more historic teams in this one, mainly because the Negro Leagues was more established at this point than they had been in the previous decade. So some really good teams. Let me get your time machine moment. We have some good options here. You got Ruth calling a shot, Gehrig's speech, Greenberg's 58 homers and 38, Satchel pitching, Gibson hitting, the Pittsburgh. You got a lot to choose from for time machine. What would you want to go back to and witness yourself firsthand?
Well, since we don't have the video of it, at least Ruth and some of these other guys, this great stuff, but we have some kind of video, we have some kind of documentation. Negro Leagues, we don't have much, just stories. And there's some video, but I would love to go back and see a game with as many stars as the game with as many stars as possible. Coop Papa Bell and Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. If there was ever a game, that had all those guys in it, that's what I want to go watch.
Yeah, I had it too. I had a Pittsburgh Crawfords game, because the Pittsburgh Crawfords at the time, at one point, had Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige on the same team. So catching a Pittsburgh Crawfords game would have been my number one. My number two would have been Ruth's called shot. The Gehrig speech would have been just too depressing. So we'll stick with Pittsburgh Crawfords and Ruth's shot 1-2. What's your do-over? What would you, if we could redo and do it right or do it differently out of this inning? What would be your do-over from this inning 5?
It'll probably have to be the same one we've had already a couple of times, and that is, they have to get this thing integrated, get everybody playing, and eventually do it. And finally, we don't have to keep doing that one over again. But other than that, I can't think of too much. There wasn't any crazy blunders this time by the Giants to do over.
Right, right.
It seemed like a pretty good decade. Obviously, Lou Gehrig would love for that not to happen. I just don't know how you could avoid such a thing. It's a medical thing, and that just happened. I don't know what anyone could have done about it, but we could have definitely done something about that gentleman's agreement. So that's what I'll go with.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you on that one. We're in lockstep on that. That's the big do-over, and it's more evident in this inning than any of the other innings. Stand out here, I've got there's a lot that you can choose from. I'm gonna go with Ted Double Duty Radcliffe. He is one of the teammates from Satchel Paige. He had some great
Oh,
stories,
yeah.
some great firsthand stories on the field and off the field. He had the story about how they were riding in the car and Satchel gets pulled over and he's going too fast. He's like, I never rode with Satchel again. He got out of the car and had someone come pick him up. You also had a great story from Buck O'Neill in this one, talking about how he was going to pitch to somebody. Satchel calls Buck over, says he's gonna. I think he said he was going to throw. He was going to throw right down the middle, and he calls the manager over, and they talk about it. It's really cool to hear those sort of firsthand stories on the field from these guys. You have anybody that really stands out to you from this inning?
Yeah, I agree that he was really good. Also, Red Barber was pretty good.
Yes.
Dodgers announcer. I love hearing his stories. He's still around at that time and was able to give a lot of great insight here. So he was good. And Vince Scully, the two those Dodgers announcers, really legends there, and they both had some really good insight. So.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And I did want to mention that before we wrapped up. This inning also brought out radio, and how radio sort of brought more fans, brought more fans to the games, that introduced the game to more fans. And radio really is special to the history of baseball. And, for years I sold radio. I actually sold baseball on radio. And it's fun to tell the story because I feel like one of the things that makes baseball so romanticized in our minds is that a lot of it, most people just didn't see because there was no television. It was radio. Radio was huge. Radio is where you heard Lou Gehrig. That's what not everybody could get to a Yankee game, especially if you couldn't afford to get to a Yankee game, but you maybe had a radio, and you have radio, radio coming to the baseball games at this point, starting to broadcast the games. Radio really grew the excitement of baseball, and it today is where we get a lot of that, I feel, romanticized history, because it was Red Barber or Vince Scully or any of the other broadcasters telling you the description of the game, and the theater of the mind can do far more than what we see on a television screen or on a movie screen. So I think that's a big thing. And radio was big. Radio was big in this one. Red Barber was huge. He had the one rhubarb segment from this where he was a country guy that went to the city to broadcast the baseball games and sayings like ducks on the pond and things like that. Nobody ever heard that until Red Barber went and was broadcasting the games in New York. Yeah, so that was big.
That's how we get a lot of expressions, so many baseball expressions that people use in everyday life and say, oh, man, that came out of left field, or just so many, I can't think of them all. But, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we're good on that. We've covered everything. We've covered everything from inning 5. We're going to have inning 6 coming up soon. That will be on Erik's channel, so you want to check that out. Inning 5 will be here on Ballcap Sports. If you haven't already, please subscribe to both of our channels, like the videos. We love the support that we get from you guys, the viewers. We wouldn't do it without you guys. So thank you for watching. Thank you for checking it out. Erik, thank you for joining me on inning 5 here, and I look forward to getting into inning 6 with you here in the next week or so.
Okay, no problem. Sounds good.
All right, thanks, guys, and we will be back soon. Take it easy.